Um, my name is Christine Curry, and I'm the outreach coordinator of the Iowa division of the Izaak Walton League. And tonight we have a super fun, enlightening presentation, the Nishnabotna settlement, what's next for Iowa water, with Neil Hamilton, emeritus agriculture law professor, author, and speaker. We're super honored to have him with us this evening, and we have a couple of people from the Nishnabotna Water Defenders, Jody Reese and Terry, will be giving us an update as well. So Neil's going to dive in and unpack a little bit of information, what's happened and the settlement, and then we'll hear from Jody and Terry. So thanks so much, Neil. Without further ado, we'll let you get started.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Christine, and thanks everyone for your interest in what has gone on the Nishnabotna. Can you all hear me? I'm coming through loud and clear. Okay, I had to come in from the farm. Our connection's not the best out in the country, and so I'm here in my office at Drake. They still let me have an office as an emeritus professor, and I work regularly. They just don't send me a paycheck quite as often. But it's an honor to speak with you and to talk with you about this unfortunate situation, but there are some bright spots. As Iowans, we're always able to find the bright spots, I think, and certainly what Jody and Terry will speak to is one of those bright spots. Jody thought that it might make sense for me to go over a little bit of background of the incident, just so that we're all on the same page. I don't want to assume knowledge that some of you might not have, but this happened beginning the weekend of March, 9th, I think, in 2024 in Red Oak at a new cooperative facility. Started on a Friday evening, apparently, and was uncovered finally by Monday morning. And what had happened in the interim was that over 260,000 gallons of concentrated nitrogen fertilizer, 32% concentration rate, had poured out of a tank that had had a valve left open, and it came out, came through the impoundment to the extent there was one apparently, and flowed into a kind of a drainage ditch stream and then into the Nishnabotna. And over the course of that weekend, it decimated the living items in the river, at least 50 miles to the border with Missouri, and then for another 10 or so as the river flows through Missouri before it reaches the Missouri River. It was one of the certainly largest fertilizer spills, and spill probably doesn't even necessarily capture it. Just to put it into context, I was thinking about it as I was involved in this, and you wonder about 260,000 gallons and what that amounts to. If you can picture your garden hydrant, which many of you have, and you crank it out, it's probably going to flow at maybe 10 gallons a minute. And so to lose 260,000 gallons, and assuming it started sometime Friday night and ran until 6 on Monday morning when it was discovered, it was flowing at somewhere around 70 gallons a minute. And so this was, I guess it'd be fair to say, it was gushing. And it had a significant impact on the life of the river. The DNR responded immediately, and you could tell from the comments of the DNR officials that they were horrified by the impact that it had on the life of the river. Their measurements indicated at least 750,000 fish were killed, though you don't know whether it might have been more than that. And that's just the fish. Of course, there were a lot of other things in the river. The river was low, as given the drought going on. It was somewhat early in the spring, right? So the belief was that some of the some of wildlife, like turtles, may not have actually been emerged yet out of the mud, and so there was some death loss that wasn't experienced, but it was major. And in fact, there's a kind of a lagging tail to this in that there's a federal investigation going on as well, because there were some endangered species, pallid sturgeons, impacted as it reached the Missouri. So this happened, and it got a little bit of attention in the media, as you might imagine, given the extent of it. But things went along for a while. And I was looking through the Iowa Code and discovered a provision that talked about how 25 citizens or more could write a letter to the director of the DNR asking the DNR to do an investigation and encourage it to be referred to the EPC, the Environmental Protection Commission. I drafted a letter which a number of people, 60 some of us, signed over the course of a weekend, went to the DNR. And it wasn't that the DNR wasn't investigating it, clearly they were, but part of the purpose of the letter was to make sure they knew that there were other people interested as well, and that as Iowa citizens, we were all impacted by the river. The good news, I think, out of that process was that the DNR requested the Environmental Protection Commission to refer it to the Attorney General office, which a decision they took at their May meeting in May of 24. It happened in Ottumwa. And so it was referred to the Attorney General's office. And part of the belief there was that the Attorney General had and has legal authority to request and impose larger penalties and, in fact, seek additional legal remedies if the state was actually interested in trying to enforce this. Well, and then, as you know, fate would have it, it kind of went into a black box or a deep hole, or who knows where it went. I was at the state fair that summer and filled out one of the requests there in the Varied Industries building at the AG's booth saying, well, I'd like somebody to tell me where the investigation is. And I had a phone message that afternoon, of course, saying predictably, well, we can't comment on investigations. And but you can ask you can talk to the DNR. So I called a friend at the DNR, and of course their answer was predictable. Well, though maybe not entirely predictable. I mean, their answer was, once we referred it to the Environmental Protection Commission and on out to the Attorney General's office, we weren't even involved in it. Right. And so the DNR was in some ways kind of washed away from it, their lawyers, maybe not their scientists. And so then it went on and it went on. And then, as Jody and Terry and others from, down home will talk about, they this summer and spring formed the Nishnabotna Water Defenders. And I'll say this, so they may not claim it. I think that it's possible that if they hadn't done that, we might still be sitting here without any resolution ever having happened in this. I think that the state was more than willing to basically let time go by and potentially sweep this under the rug. They didn't, as we'll talk about, but there was a lot of sweeping going on, I think, and so the question was kind of what was going on in these 14 months between when it was referred to the AG's office and when something finally emerged, as if by magic, at the end of July of this summer. During that period, unless I've missed something, I don't believe that Governor Reynolds said a word about it, and I don't believe that Mike Negg ever issued a statement about it of any type, even though it involves a regulated product regulated by IDOLs and was one of the largest, destructive incidents to happen in Iowa and Iowa nature in decades. So that brings us up to the end of July. And then at the end of July, kind of boom, up jumps the bunny, and the Attorney General's office essentially announces a settlement with the new co-op. And there are two legal documents, and Jody, they have them on their website. There is a consent order and a judgment and a decree, and then there's also a petition in equity. And the petition kind of lays out the state's legal case, citing some of the legal authorities that they were using in terms of how they saw the violation. And those are, I believe, significant because they involved the choices of enforcement provisions that allowed them to come up with the remedy that they did. And then you have the consent decree. And the bottom line is that they imposed a $50,000 penalty on a new co-op. They also required them to put $50,000 into what they are referring to as a supplemental environmental project. And this is $50,000 that they were paying to the Montgomery County Conservation Board to be used for a number of what appear to be fairly identified and discrete purposes, none of which have anything to do with the Nishnabotna or with water quality. And then there's a provision that says there's a 3-year injunction basically requiring new cooperative not to violate the law. Well, no surprise, all of us are under a guidance that we don't violate the law, right? I'm not quite sure what more the injunction gets you, though I'm sure the Attorney General would say that, well, it allows us to go straight to court and we don't have to pass go, and that there's this specific language that they have violated. And so, the bottom line is that, $50,000 is not insignificant, but in the great scheme of things, it doesn't seem to be a particularly right significant penalty given the extent of what was done. And in addition, at least as I read the decree, there is no additional form of required compensation or penalty concerning the actual fish kill, right? The penalty is a penalty that exists in Iowa law for when you have violated, right, the hazardous substance disposal requirements. In addition, Iowa has separate rules that value fish or other wildlife, and that comes up with a formula that you could be charged based on so much. And I think if you think about it, you can all probably remember reading stories about manure spills or an overflow from a lagoon. And oftentimes the story would say, well, and the DNR determined that, 16,000 minnows and 10 chub and 6 catfish, were actually discovered. And those numbers are used by the DNR to impose these penalties that are established. And interestingly enough, there's a set minimum penalty for certain species of fish, including bass, of $15 a fish. That's not the case with minnows and chubs and other kind of smaller fish, which the vast majority of the 750,000 were. But there doesn't appear to be anything that happened in that regard. And so in terms of thinking about this, and part of the reason that I wrote or helped lead the effort to write a letter to the Attorney General's office was that back in 2023, I had another book published that was called The River Knows. It was narrated by the Raccoon River, and it kind of tried to look at nature and our situation in Iowa, particularly from the perspective of the river. And as I like to think about it, if the river was sitting here and giving this talk, it would say, well, there's 3 things that I know for sure as the river. This was entirely predictable, given the cavalier attitude that you have in terms of how you handle these type of products. And you can certainly see that, right, in that if there were any protections for how this stuff wasn't supposed to make it to the water, whether that would be a night watchman, a monitoring system, an alarm that would go off for a leaking valve, or an impoundment system would work, they certainly didn't seem to work, right? And so I think you can take from that it's a good example of the fact that we really don't care or think that much about nature. So one, entirely predictable. Secondly, I'm here in Des Moines. Many of you are in other parts of the state. And to some extent, as the story unfolded with the Nishnabotna, a lot of us thought, well, no skin off our nose. Nishnabotna is 150 miles away down southwest Iowa, you know. But the second thing was it could have happened anywhere. This could have happened in Perry. It could have happened, on the Raccoon, on the Cedar, on the Des Moines. And think about how much, I mean, and this isn't certainly to downplay the impact of what happened on the Nish. But the Nish, I think it doesn't hopefully insult anybody to admit that the Nish was a little degraded to begin with, right? It's been channelized, and it's not necessarily one of Iowa's pristine rivers, though it has its attributes. But if it would have happened, 10 miles upstream from the Des Moines Waterworks, we would have been in a world of hurt, right? And it would have made this summer's lawn watering ban look relatively insignificant. The third thing the river knows, and I think you can see from this, and this also is a segue to Jody when I shut up, which I promise I'll do at some point, that when this happened, nobody was going to come to its rescue, right? Nobody could wave a wand and clean up the river, and it wasn't even clear who was going to step forward and clean it up. So the other day I sat down and I drafted a little memo to myself about, the lessons that you can learn from the Nishnabotna incident. And I've already told you what the first three were, but I think, there are other ones that come to my mind. I think that there's a relatively ineffective legal and administrative mechanism to give citizens the ability to act in situations like this. We're left with the Department of Natural Resources and the Environmental Protection Commission, both which are imbued and required to be representing the public's interest in protecting nature and our rights to the water. For example, all the water in the state are public waters. But I think we recognize that they are also bodies that can be and have been, in certain circumstances, politicized. And so, in addition, the limitations on that approach are also demonstrated by the length of time involved and the relative lack of effective remedies. Another lesson, I think, is that the failure of the state to impose penalties, the law works around trying to encourage social behavior. I mean, that's why we establish regulations. We don't establish regulations to penalize people. We establish regulations to establish expected standards of conduct on the part of society, and they protect us, right? And when laws are violated, then we impose penalties. And the penalties are oftentimes a function of either the severity of the penalty or the significance of what was involved in terms of how society perceives it. And all you need to do is think about the variation in criminal penalties for that regard. And so penalties are designed to do several things. They're to penalize the conduct, right? To punish you for having done it. They're sending a message to other actors so that maybe you might want to think twice about doing this. And there's also an attempt to try to compensate the public, right, for using the type of remedy or penalty that may have been involved. I think this incident also illustrates, at least to me, and this may be more political than some of you want to go to, but there's relatively almost no way to influence, communicate with, or move the Attorney General's office on anything once they're engaged in an investigation. Now, I'm a lawyer, and they as lawyers would say, well, that's how you would want it to be. You don't want investigations influenced, right, by special pleading or by people telling you you need to enforce the laws against certain people. But it also shouldn't just be this kind of mysterious, who knows whether anything's ever going to happen, right, in terms of at least some type of reporting. I would have thought that the Environmental Protection Commission might have been interested what was going on. Now, who knows? Maybe they were being told, right? And there are communications that we don't know about. But I think that lack of communication might have signaled a relative lack of concern to anybody who was impacted, perhaps even in this situation, the party responsible. I think that this that lack of accountability uh, is also reflected in the decision to resolve the matter in what I think is fair to describe as a de minimis form of penalty. She was on Iowa Press on Friday and was asked about this, and she made several interesting claims. One, that the penalties were limited to $5,000 a day for 20 days. And obviously, the 20 days isn't in the statute anywhere. I mean, you have to somehow determine how many days they were, quote, in violation. But there's the next section of the same code for a negligent violation provides $25,000 a day penalties. And in fact, you could at least argue they were negligently in violation for 4 days. That was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday that the thing was flowing, right? And so the whole idea that we were somehow capped and these limited penalties, and then, there wasn't anything more we could do. Um, and let me put it another way. If there had been a desire to seek and impose a stricter penalty, one that might have sent a more significant message, it certainly would have been possible, right? In that, uh, you know, who knows how the courts would have resolved it at the end of the day. But clearly, all of this was somehow negotiated behind the scenes. And then, boom, up comes this day in July, this consent right decree is entered, and this petition in equity is filed. And in her, talk on Iowa Press, she talked about how she had filed this litigation and launched these investigations, and giving her the benefit of the doubt, it was the Environmental Protection Commission that launched the investigation when they made the referral. I think that this incident also reflects the fact that there was very little uh, citizen participation in the process, both certainly in the investigation and in crafting the remedies. And I think it's probably an open question how much the DNR officials were involved in crafting the remedies as well. It'd be interesting to hear Kayla Lyons explain why it was they didn't charge them for any of the dead fish. Apparently, the fish were free, right, in terms of the penalty, because there's, at least as I read it, and there hasn't been anything in the press that talks about there was any penalty imposed for the dead fish. Well, I think these feelings helped illustrate the value and the need for a citizens group, and that's what Jody and Terry are going to speak to in terms of the creation of the Nishnabotna Water Defenders. And I think history may show that one of the most significant outcomes from this incident, just like you've seen happen on the Bloody Run situation with the creation of the driftless defenders, water defenders, is the reaction of local citizens recognizing if anybody's going to stand up on their hind legs and organize to try to protect the state's water, it's going to be the citizens. I think the incident also demonstrates a couple other things, and I'll be quiet. Some of you may remember Paul Johnson, and as you know, there's a new book. Kurt Meany's edited a book, a collection of Paul's writings and speeches. In fact, it's just published and it's going to be released in October. Any of you that come to the Nature Summit that we're holding in November are going to get a copy. And Paul was involved in any number of laws. One that isn't particularly well known because it was vetoed was that in 1989, Paul and colleagues drafted the Iowa Environmental Advocates Law. And this would have created an independent office of the Iowa Environmental Advocate. Basically created a freestanding office outside of the Justice Department that was nature's advocate. It was kind of a reflection of the idea of rights of nature and who has, that should trees have standing, a legal theory that had a fair amount of passion at that time. And the law passed the legislature, vetoed by Governor Branstad, and who claimed that Iowa didn't need a cops and robbers approach towards the enforcement of environmental laws, and our environmental laws were adequate to protect the interests of the state, and that you could trust the departments to do that. And I think if you think how differently things might be if we had an independent office of environmental advocate that was somehow, to the extent you could, shielded from political influence. I think that this incident also illustrates that when incidents like this happen, it may be too easy for people to assume that somebody else is going to take care of it. The DNR is going to do their job, the county's going to do their job, somebody else can do their job. And the reality of it is, you can't, one, depend on that, and two, it may be our job. Right? This is our water, it's their river, it's all of our rivers. And so I think that finally, the incident also helps underline our understanding of how and why Iowa's water quality issues are real, and why the nitrite contamination in our rivers and streams continues to exist, and how it develops, right? This is our attitude towards how we handle these products. And so the fact they got into the water and we killed a river, well, hell, there are things growing in it now. We didn't kill it forever. It wasn't like a tattoo. But at the same time, it should help us think about why we need to do, I think, a better job of trying to consider new protections for our waters and restraints on polluting inputs and creating higher expectations for public officials. And with that, Christine, I'll end, and we've got some time. Oh my gosh, only 7:30. Jody and Terry can talk. There may be some questions. Maybe people want to disagree with what I said. If you do, tough, but I'm certainly happy to listen, and we'll go from there.
Gosh, Neil, what a honor to have you as, completely assess that whole situation and give us a full overview of what's happened and what's taking place. It is always so great to, hear you talk. You just have a great way of presenting.
Well,
And
thank you, Christine. That's kind of you.
no, it's very true. And we're super lucky to have so many brilliant people in our state. We really are. I'm just super grateful every time I hear people like you, and it makes, I don't know what we'd do without your voice and others like that. So thank you again. And this evening we have a couple of exciting highlights that we're going to be sharing with you after our talk. We're super excited about a new campaign that's taking place, and we'll share that with you. And in the meantime, I'm going to let Jody and Terry take it over. They've just been super new residents of Iowa. We're super grateful to have them in our state. They're making already so many contributions and connecting with their community in a big way, and putting us on the map, literally, with initiatives like the brilliant billboard that we've all talked about doing billboards before. And here they are doing that in this much needed environment to build awareness. So I'll let Jody and Terry take it away. Thanks so much again, you guys, for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. I think this is the third time the Nishnabotna Water Defenders have been on Watershed Talks. That's pretty awesome. I want to really give a shout out to Denise O'Brien and Larry Harris, who are here on our board also, Nishnabotna Water Defenders. Everyone knows them, they're a legacy. So thank you for them too. So really, this billboard campaign was something we talked about doing, and we were really grateful for the Izaak Walton League and Nitrate Watch to partner with us. I think everything just fell into place really well, and we were able to get one up. Denise was actually quite pivotal in communicating with Lamar, finding a good place, and the first one we put up was by the Flying J in Red Oak, or excuse me, Avoca, where that was a known leak site that was being monitored and then leaked again into the niche. So you can read all about that. But what I really wanted to do was actually have Terry speak a little bit more to the federal investigation, because he knows a lot more about that and was able to access information. So take it away.
Yeah. Yeah. Like was said, we're pretty new here to Iowa, and it's been, I can't imagine what it's been like for people who've grown up here and lived here their whole lives to watch this, the trajectory of the disrespect, the complete corporate capture of the state of Iowa as far as land use and our health, the health of the water, the rising cancer rates. It's disheartening, disconcerting to say the least from a new person's standpoint. But we got here on purpose with a set of policies and a lack of spine from our elected officials, so we can get somewhere else. But as Neil was describing, I think pretty generously, there was a spill, but I didn't think about that in that way, that if we had not formed this group, they would still be waiting. But that's probably really accurate. That's just a pretty standard industry practice to delay until it goes away, especially until the emotional part of it goes away, at least a year or two. And so you can look at how the environmental assessments are set up for cases like this, and it's set up to elongate the investigation until the public moves on, and that allows the offender to settle, like you said, behind closed doors. And but the federal investigation, Missouri also had they had an investigation, and anyone can look at any of their documents in Missouri. They have a sunshine policy in Missouri, so any tax dollars that are spent on anything in Missouri is public record, and you just have to file a request. And you can, I think that would be great to have in Iowa or everywhere else in a democracy. But that was actually, so they settled on whatever day at the end of July, first part of August. Like they said, we formed, part of our inspiration was the driftless defenders over there with Chris Jones, and then the raccoon, Friends of the Raccoon River there in the central part of the state. But their legal representation, Jim LaRue, had a case on the east side of the state for a repeat violator, just a constant water permit violator that was from a meatpacking plant. That had gone to a federal case, and Brenna Bird on that same day did an end around on their case and settled at a state level, just kind of like she had it on a list. We'll check off these environmental problems and pennies on the dollar for that offender, but no remediation effort. I mean, nothing will be done. So to change their practices as far as, changing code or it's shocking to me to see what is allowed here, because I've worked in industries all over the place, and almost any other sector of our infrastructure, of our society, have regulations, building regulations. I mean, stormwater protection plants. If you're going to build a playground, you have to pull permits to keep silt out of the storm sewers. I mean, it's basic pretty much for anything, but agriculture has a 100% exemption when it comes to FAA, which we found out this summer with crop dusters flying right over our houses, spraying our neighbors and friends with fungicides. Called the FAA. They said those guys have a federal exemption. They can fly anywhere at any elevation to get their job done. I was stunned. I couldn't even believe it. But that seems to be where we are with that. But the spill that Neil described so well was really 3 spills. The first one that they found Monday morning, they called someone at the city that came and shut the valve to the berm, which isolated it to the parking lot. The tank was 500,000 gallons, so they self-reported 260,000 gallons. It could very well have been 500,000 gallons, and we just don't know. But they started the cleanup process in the parking lot, which is, there's a really good map of the site in the settlement agreement that you can look at. But so they're pumping out the standing nitrate, the liquid nitrate, then excavating the soil and exporting that to farms or in the area or whatever, to wherever they wanted to put it. So another rain event was coming a couple weeks later. So someone at the city and it sounds like the DNR was there also. They decided to reopen that valve so that the parking lot wouldn't overflow apparently into the field or into town with all that material, and they let it flush again. And then 2 months later, there was a bigger rain event that actually knocked the berm out. So everything that was left in the parking lot flushed back into the river. So really it was 3 spills. But on the initial big event in March, they detected elevated nitrate levels in Kansas City. That's according to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So if you look at a flow ratio from the Nishnabotna to the Missouri River, it's 200 to 1. And that's almost 200 miles from here. So that is unbelievable. They were shocked at that. That was surprising to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, whose assessment is ongoing. And Ed Kretzky is the guy who's heading up their investigation for them. They have information on their website where their assessment is at. He said that the Iowa's Attorney General's settlement is separate from their ongoing investigation, and when their assessment is complete, they will seek restoration, remediation for whatever damages and whatever amounts that they find necessary. But there's no timeline on that, so it may be into the next administration by the time that occurs. But in a place without regulation or enforcement, we will not have compliance. So this is typical practice. We've seen this in other states with other industries. They know what the price of doing business is, and it's an externality that's off-sourced to the public. So our public officials are in violation of the public trust doctrine. They are not protecting us as citizens. That's their job. That is in their. That's what they take an oath to do, and it's not happening. It's not happening here. It's not happening in a lot of places. So I guess it is up to us as citizens to mobilize and organize and put in leadership that will represent, or, the legislation he's talking about, rights of nature legislation, that's happening all over the place. That's could be gaining traction. If a corporation has the rights of a citizen, then why doesn't a river? Why doesn't wild rice growing in Minnesota? That legislation made it to a federal appellate court before it was tossed. But kids are suing for their future because they know. We were at the DNR had a comment period today. A lot of you were on there talking about, it was just so clear to me that the DNR in Iowa is just a window dressing where people can go vent their complaints, and the structure of it is set up for business to continue with the commodification of our natural resources, including our time and our lives and our children's future. That's also a resource that's being extracted from us in the interest of greed. And I don't know anybody that's okay with that. So how do we make these changes? There are things, the Iowa Environmental Council, I don't know if anybody's on from that, they keep track of the pulse of legislation in the state and what's got traction and current, what could possibly get some motion. They're advocating for a moratorium on CAFOs in the state by county, because we know how to quantify the amount of nutrients that a land mass can take. A certain volume of land and water can handle. And like many people have probably heard Chris Jones say, you know, we're asking the soil and water of Iowa to process 30 times more than it can take. So Jody's in medicine. She's, when you're bleeding out, you triage the situation. So first you try to stop the bleeding and then try to identify, you know, other cures. But yeah, it seems like only 6 months is it's just a whirlwind happening with what's going on in Des Moines, and that water report, you know, I guess since that, I don't know what will happen since the money disappeared to advertise the findings of that report. It would be nice if that $400,000 came back onto their budget so they could do what they were hired to do. But in lieu of that, I guess it's up to us to advertise that. Excellent. I mean, very comprehensive, well done, nonpartisan, 16 scientists, 200 pages. It gives you the whole story of where we're at with the water situation in Iowa, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a question here in the chat. I'm going to stop you for just a second that fits with something you've said and something that Neil said earlier, and it's from Denise. Will Missouri sue Iowa, or do you think they might? And how might they get reparations? And then Jan Norris is very involved in Montgomery County, and she was at the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors. You talked something about the $50,000, and it appears that Montgomery County is not talking about that $50,000. And early on, maybe it was even just before we started, you talked about, and I think it was Neil who mentioned what that 50,000 could be used for. So maybe if you can.
Well, I can, on that last question, Chris, I'm looking at the decree, and it says, and I'll quote, defendant new co-op shall conduct a supplemental environmental project called an SEP. The SEP shall consist of a payment to the Montgomery County Conservation Board to be used for projects including, habitat and prairie restoration, controlled burn equipment purchases, habitat management, and native tree planting. There's no and other things or other things like this or water quality. It lists 4 very specific things, as which I mentioned, none of which have anything to do with directly with water quality or directly with the river as well. And so, you know, this was a remedy somebody cooked up. I think Tim Wagner in his comments is referring to it as greenwashing. You know, earlier I mentioned the fact that the quote decree has nothing about the fish kill damages. That provision allows and requires for the compensation of staff time, for the DNR, all the time that they spent counting the dead fish, trying to work with the cleanup. All of those costs were recoverable under Iowa law. And there's nothing about any of that in here. And again, you know, I said it's unclear to me whether the DNR was very directly involved in negotiating the settlement of the case, or, you know, whether they had a dog in the fight. The Attorney General's elected. The DNR serves at the pleasure of the governor. The governor appears to have washed her hands of the whole matter. And on the question of whether Missouri could sue Iowa, they certainly they could. I think and the issue of what would be the jurisdiction for that. I mean, this is a Federal Clean Water Act violation. The Nish is clearly jurisdictional waters. It flows in interstate commerce. It flows into the Missouri. It's impacted by all the states that are part of that river compact. And so there isn't any question about the jurisdiction. Part of the question would be the political will to do it. because the Missouri DNR would also be subject to certain overarching political concerns on the part of the state's hierarchy. And similarly, from the federal government standpoint, even with this Fish and Wildlife suit, I think, it shouldn't surprise anybody to recognize that we have a much different regime in power now, with a much different attitude towards the idea of enforcement of federal environmental laws. And so whether or not that would find its way down to the level of this enforcement, or more likely find its way up to when the idea of this type of enforcement kind of became real, that is, to be seen. Terry, you mentioned the idea that it might be a future administration, that there might be that much time involved, and that. You can form your own conclusions in terms of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But Christine has an important announcement that she would like to make, and we have our colleague Dale Braun on, and the Ikes are, of course, the sponsors of this Watershed Talk. So Christine, is now a good time for you and Dale to share the exciting news with everyone?
I think this might be a great time. Dale's been working hard today, like he always is. It's just amazing to me that we have people who are retired that are working pretty much full time and overtime with these efforts, and I'm super grateful. Dale has put together our launch for our campaign, and this is not an official, we're going to be having like an official launch date, but this is kind of a preview of a special campaign. As people were, I think Terry was pointing out the water report that was released at the Harkin Institute at Drake University, talked about the water monitoring program being cut. And so the Iowa division of the Izaak Walton League has stepped up. Like we all know, we're living in a state that is so dependent on its rivers and farmland, yet underfunded in protecting them. That citizens are forced to crowdfund water monitoring. That's the reality in Iowa today. So I'm going to let Dale just talk a little bit more about what the Iowa Division is doing to help us solve this problem. Thanks, Dale.
Well, thank you, Christine, and thanks everybody for attending today. Great presentation by Neil, Jody, and Terry. So we're kicking off a GoFundMe page, and essentially what we're doing is we're trying to raise the funds to augment the University of Iowa's water monitoring program. They need approximately $500,000 a year to fund that program. That includes things like monitor maintenance, checking on the monitors, staff costs for checking on those monitors. There's approximately 70 in the state that they're looking forward to looking after, I should say. Their funding ends in middle of 2026. So what we're doing at the Iowa division of the Izaak Walton League level is standing up this GoFundMe page with some details about why we're doing it, that the legislators don't want to do it, so let us citizens do it for them. And hopefully it does two things. One is raise the money. That's our main goal, which we will then immediately give to the University of Iowa hydrology department, not to go into some general bucket somewhere, but to actually do water monitoring activities. And then second of all, we hope it's a challenge to our legislators to say, hey, you know what? So we cut out the funding for this program a few years back. And guess what? Now we look like we got egg on our face because the citizens are stepping up to fund it. And I think that just holds a whole bunch of goodwill on our part, and also advertises that to the general public, because as we all know, whether it's a billboard or articles in the papers, which are becoming more and more prevalent around the state, that people, normal, regular citizens, are paying closer attention to this. And I can attest from the fact that the Izaak Walton League has handed out just buckets and boxes of nitrate testing kits around the state to anybody that wants one. They're free of charge. So, so that's our goal, is to raise the money, keep the program going at the University of Iowa for the 70 or so monitors that they do maintain now. And then continue to advertise the findings that those monitors present to our citizens and to the cities along those rivers, because, hey, if the city doesn't know what's coming down to it, they can't react to it, whether it's Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Ottumwa, you name it. Those cities are got to be concerned about nitrate as well. If Kansas City can see a hit in nitrates from Red Oak, Iowa, that tells you what would that impact be on one of our major cities, as Neil described earlier with Des Moines. 270,000 gallons. That's 20 semi-loads of fluid, by the way. That's how much that is if you really need a comparison. Just dumped into the river. And from what I hear from Terry now, I got a question whether it isn't even more, based on 2 more spills and new co-op estimating that it was 270,000 gallons in their tank. And this was correct me if I'm wrong, this was season usage, so it was probably even full, for all we know. So anyway, I'll be quiet, but that's where we're at with this new GoFundMe page. I will congratulate Neil for being the first contributor to it, and Pat Bodie was number 2. So we're on our way. We've got it going. So, and then we're going to keep updating the GoFundMe page as we get more and more into it.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to speak to this for a little bit too, and I want to commend Dale and the Ikes, the board of the Izaak Walton League, and Christine for driving this idea. I'm excited to be involved, and the Iowa Nature Summit are part of kind of a partner in this effort in promoting it. And one of our goals with the Iowa Nature Summit is to try to identify concrete steps that citizens can take to try to do something for Iowa nature. Last year, part of our theme was vote for nature. Keep it in mind as we were facing the elections. Any of you that were at the discussion about the Central Iowa Water Study remember the almost gasp that went through the room when Larry Weber showed the picture of the monitoring system, the 90 that are in place now and the 20 that would remain after their funding disappears. And so, there's no way we know whether the water is getting dirtier or getting better. And of course, we have some people who claim it's getting better. But if we don't collect the data, what does that say about us? And, the idea that we would allow these monitors to go dark is a real, I think, tragedy. And unfortunately, the legislators and public officials of the state have let the citizens down in this regard. And so the citizens are going to step up, and the Ikes are leading that effort. And it'll be one that we all hope that thousands of Iowans join on to show, one, that we care about this, and to, in some ways, and Denise said this in a comment in the chat, to shame the state of Iowa as to the unwillingness of the public officials to do this very basic thing of tracking what's actually happening in our water.
That's well said, Neil. Exactly. And we know it's a lot worse. I mean, just think about all the waterways that things happen to, but people aren't looking. Chris Henning had a neighbor who noticed the black, stinky pig spill manure that happened 2 summers ago. And if it wasn't for the neighbor being aware that other people were starting to look in the streams, that might have not ever, nobody may have ever noticed that. So there's probably many streams that go unnoticed that there's spills and other things happening. But because now people are starting to look and be aware, this can change things. So people can make a difference. And,
Chris,
yes,
Christine, just like really piggybacking on that, just something that we're pushing in with our community group is additionally, with the nitrate testing, people to do that with Nitrate Watch, with the groundwater and logging it through Nitrate Watch to contribute to the database in lieu of the shutdown. So I'm really happy to hear about this funding. But also that we want to keep an eye on new co-ops. And I think it's important, someone in the chat put that, they have 82 locations and many of them are on waterways. And since they are on notice for 36 months as part of this settlement, as Neil pointed out, we're really encouraging people to watch new co-ops. They are known polluters long before this happened.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a water violation. It could be anything, air or whatever. But we want people to be testing water upstream, maybe at the point and downstream, and logging it, because it's really the community that notices violations, identifies fish kills, identifies funny looking water. We need to it's us. It's what this whole conversation is about. Yeah.
And
right.
maybe Neil could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the pollution nuisance ordinance in Iowa consists of particulate matter also. So that's dust coming out of the new co-op containment, their processing facility right next to the Hy-Vee there in Red Oak. Isn't that a pollution? I mean, that is, you can taste it. It's in the air. It's right next to the Pizza Ranch. But we're just so used to this as like a standard of living that it's, am I off base there, Neil, or?
Neil, you're muted.
Sure, the whole question. What was the question again, Terry?
Oh, as far as the ordinances that cover nuisance pollution, if I read that correctly, dust, particulate matter, is a pollution. That's an offense. If they had, well, the reason I know that is because new co-op was cited for that twice before, at different locations, where they paid a fine to the DNR.
Sure. Well, all I would caution people, I've spent 40 plus years now as a lawyer. And the fact that the law says something doesn't mean that the law may well be enforced, or that it's certainly, self-enacting. And, Terry, on several occasions, you mentioned the idea of new laws, right? Or a law on the rights of nature, or whatever. My view is we have plenty of laws on the books. We just need to have the willpower and the officials to enforce them. We don't need any new legal authority. There's plenty of legal authority to address water quality, to address this incident, for example, and to have done it in a much more timely and effective manner. And so it's not necessarily the law. It may well be the lawyers and the public officials, and that's a different issue. But they're all related, certainly. But if you can't get people to enforce the laws you already have, trying to get them to enact a new one, just as a glorified exercise in can kicking. And we don't need any more necessarily can kicking. We need to be putting some people in the can. But Christine, we're at the end of our time, and I'm going to go into overtime here in Union
Yes.
in a few minutes if we have to go much longer. But and I have to drive at night, getting old and driving out the countryside. And,
We will excuse you, Neil, and we are so grateful. We're looking forward to doing our official launch for this GoFundMe. There will be a major press release, press releases happening, and we will keep everybody informed and share our message widely. So be looking for that. We're putting together a big campaign, and as soon as we have that ready, we'll let everybody know, and we'll message everybody, and hopefully we can amplify and share that message throughout our state and share more billboards throughout the state and more messaging so we can make people aware. And we are the oldest organization in the country that was founded on clean water. And I'm super thrilled that the Iowa division has stepped up for this initiative. It makes me really, really happy to be a part of this and for our state. So I'm super grateful for everybody taking out time this evening and for Chris Henning's help and Neil and everybody else. And this will be recorded. It's on our Iowa Ike's .com page, and I will all the recorded sessions are on the website, usually within a few days after we have our live sessions. So we will see you next month. We are still working on a few programs. We have some other things lined up, but every once in a while when we have something going on, we'll have a special Watershed Talk. So we'll keep you posted.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
31 miles.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Proud to be an Ike tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Bye-bye, everybody.
Go Ikes.
How do I
Thank
close this?
you.